Hello and welcome to Forgotten Cello Music, episode 39. This was supposed to be an episode about the cello in France in the 18th century, derived mostly from Wasilewski's book, The Violoncello and Its History. Well, in a way it still is, but I've narrowed it down to just one cellist composer. That is Jean-Baptiste Bréval. Now, for the music that I've chosen, it comes from 6 sonatas in the intermediate level and from his Cello Treatise or Cello Method. I've done Sonata number 1 in C major, and Allegro, and Rondo Grazioso. All of these sonatas are only 2 movements, and they provide some really nice music learning opportunities. Every cellist that I know has played this sonata in C major thanks to Suzuki. Then sonata number 4, I decided to do, this is in B flat major, only the aria, which is an andantino. It's a theme and variations. Very intriguing because you hardly ever run into variations in student material and definitely not in sonatas in the cellist world. Very, very rare stuff, so I had to put it in there. And then number 6 is D major, and I did both movements, Allegro and Rondo. And very often he does this, where he does an Allegro and then a Rondo. Now from his cello method, I went and just picked out these movements, something that sounded musical. This was my aim, is that it sounded musical. It shows what he intended with these works that he put specifically into his Cello Treatise. So, from the key of C major, we've got number 16, 22, and 23. From the key of G major, 32 and 33. From the key of B minor, 61. Key of C minor, number 96. From the key of A minor, number 145. I will include the music in not really any order, but generally when I'm reading something, an excerpt, for example, from his cello method, I'll be doing, inserting in the background the exercises from that. Let's get on to Jean-Baptiste Bréval, and this is his entry that Joseph Wasilewski gave him in his book, The Violoncello and Its History, from page 98. A pupil of Jean-Baptiste Cupie, born in 1741, Bréval was born in 1756 in the department of Ain. So quickly developed his talent that he was able very clearly to appear at the Concert Spirituel with brilliant success. He was a member of the Paris Opera Orchestra from 1781 to 1806. In 1796 followed his nomination as teacher of violoncello, playing at the Conservatoire. From this he was released in 1802, as the number of pupils at the institution was not large enough to keep him employed. Towards the end of his life, Bréval retired to Chamonmille, a village in the neighborhood of Laon. He shortly after died there at the end of 1825. Bréval published for the violoncello 7 concertos, 5 sets of duets, 3 sonatas with bass, and 12 airs variés. Besides these, he wrote 2 concertantes, quartets, trios, and an instruction book under the title Méthode raisonnée de violoncello, which appeared in Paris in 1804. His cello pieces were formerly much in request, but have long been obsolete. As a player, Bréval had a finished style but in his rendering lacked force and energy. A note at the end of the book, Méthode raisonnée de violoncelle, Paris, 1804. That is, this violoncello school appeared in 1810 in London, translated into English by J. Pyle, under the title, New Instruction for the Violoncello, being a complete key to the knowledge of that instrument. Now, the public domain upload and IMSLP is titled Traité du violoncelle. I guess that is translated as Treatise for the Violoncello. Some extracts from the Cello Treatise by Bréval. He wrote not an overabundance in the treatise. There is far more music than there is writing. So it's not particularly something that you would go to learn cello from the absolute beginning. It's funny, at the beginning of the preface, he actually writes, "The difficulty of making a good method for the cello has undoubtedly prevented several artists until now from emerging in this kind of storm that has become necessary. The small number of those which exist seem to me not to contain enough elementary principles and to walk by leaps instead of following a gradual march. I tried to make up for what had been obviated. Far from believing, however, that I have succeeded, I think, on the contrary, that I have left much to say to those who will take care of continuing a work for which this will become a preparation." Yes, a comment. It is very interesting and kind of funny that he actually mentions specifically that he wants to avoid leaping over fundamental or elementary principles. And again, in some ways, he doesn't leap over. He does do more of a step-by-step. It just is not what we think of as a method in these days, where we've had 100 years worth of increasingly more detailed steps, or smaller steps, baby steps, if you will. And I'm not saying either one is bad. I'm actually saying that the way that methods are written these days are good in a way, because you really do get the essence of any particular technique, so that you're not left guessing at all about what to do. So if the student is responsive and the teacher is able to get across that concept in a clear and positive way, I think that goes much farther than the old way of just, okay, hold your bow right, get your fingers in the right place. Your fingers are not in the right place. Get them in the right place, and then try to show them either by coercion or just simply moving their fingers without helping them understand what's going on. So yes, it's very interesting. Once you get to the point of being knowledgeable in cello technique, then I think when we go back, we're looking at it from a different lens. Of course we are. So it's really gleaning from the past to inform why we do things the way we do nowadays. And I think this is a great example of why we have gone the route of narrowing down the techniques, the principles that are presented in a lesson. Of the bow, he writes, "The bow is unquestionably the working pen of all that constitutes the mechanism of the art of playing string instruments. And later he says that habit teaches not to tighten the bow too much. It must be free in the hand, like the quill we use to write. It must also have a kind of modified elasticity according to the different functions, which are known by the expressions detached, removed, cast, etc. It is only by use that all these things are learned, and not by theory, which could only be long and diffuse. And I would just make a comment here about elasticity. You know, when I was learning cello, I learned to hold it with a very stiff thumb, hand, all around. Everything was stiff. And I squeezed the living daylights out of the frog, and if it was soft at all, there would have been an indentation in it. And consequently, I could not really pull a big sound out of my instrument because I was always squashing the strings. And it's interesting that all of the really good cellists out there have some sort of elasticity in their fingers. But there is one cellist in particular that I have always admired about his incredibly beautiful bow hand. And, there's not a lot of cellists that play like that. And that's Stephen Isserlis. I think his bow hand is really a work of art, the way he uses it. Now he goes on to talk about fingering. And suffice it to say, there were all kinds of, not rules, but every cellist out there seemed to have their own system of fingering, and they advised their students to do the same. And he came along and said, well, why not do it according to what is comfortable on the cello instead of emulating the violin? So the violin, as we know, has the fingering such: open 1, 2, 3, open 1, 2, 3 for a major scale. And the cellos apparently were doing the same thing, or similar things anyway, where it's not easily, let me put it this way. The violins are able to play a unison with their fourth finger. So if they put their fourth finger on the string below the upper string, those two notes produced are exactly the same, a unison. So a fourth finger on the D string is an A, just like the open A string. The cello can do it, but it's a huge stretch. And that kind of thing is usually not learned until, advanced playing occurs. And Bréval said, well, let's do it so that the hand is comfortable. So a major scale would be open 1, 3, 4, open 1, 3, 4, for example. And then to play a unison, you'd have to shift up. And that's what he's talking about here. It's really quite remarkable that, I don't know if he was the first one, but he certainly wrote it down. Now as we move on, he writes periodically with each group. So the interesting thing about his treatise is that he makes big groups of technique. So he's got introductory type of introductory type of exercises, and then after that you get scales in all 24 keys, and after each scale you get a number of duets illustrating how it can be utilized, how it can be played. So you get the practice of doing the scale in your head, and then you do the work, the musical exercises to get along well. Following section, he wants to introduce higher positions, and in fact he's introducing the tenor clef in the next section. There's a number of keys, but the majority of the keys are like B flat, D major, G major, C major. Nothing too crazy. Although in the first 170 exercises, since he goes through all 24 keys, of course you have to play some Verdi and Wagner-like key signatures in order to be able to get through the entire 170 exercises. And after the upper positions, or the tenor clef position music, which are not upper positions, I misspoke. They are really solidly fourth position and below. After that, then he does some upper position. He has arpeggios and a whole slew of variations on those arpeggios. Finally, at the end of the first instruction section, before the exercises and music little duets come of the 24 keys, he shows us what the names of the strings are, and then he says, "I know of no other rule for learning to tune the instrument correctly other than to train the ear to grasp the ratio of two notes forming a fifth, and nothing but habit can lead to this result." And I really like how he puts it, because yeah, in a way that's really true. You need experience. You need to just try it out and figure out what it sounds like. Now on to my observations on the method by Bréval. Bréval's cello method continues on like this for all subsequent sections. In between each section of instruction are exercises, duets, sonatas, and arpeggio variations. After the initial exercises come duets in all 24 keys, and each of those keys are preceded by the scale of that key. You know, it's really much like Broderick and Wilkinson and the Shetke 12 duets. They have prefatory remarks about accompanying and technique of playing, and this is what I found with Bréval's method. Yes, it is a little bit more advanced and gives you a more philosophical idea of what is to be expected. He's definitely not holding your hand, helping you figure out what to do, even though he says this is actually for people living in the country where you don't have access to a teacher. So whether people thought more insightfully back then, I guess that might be true. The music that you hear is simple in many regards, especially since it remains in first position in the first 170 exercises. But they really are demanding because of so many string crossings, and these are done in every conceivable permutation of fingering and bowing. There's not... I think they weren't, back in those days, they really weren't concerned with micro steps, baby steps maybe is a better way. And I would also comment that these exercises If you want to get a lot of just Baroque practice in, Baroque exercises in, then doing things like this really puts you through your paces. It just, if you go through even let's say even one duet from each of the 24 keys, you will certainly know how to get around the first position without problems. It will be quite easy by the time you get to the last number. And that's really what I find most intriguing and compelling about these forgotten cello methods. The Broderip and Wilkinson, the Schottky duets, preface, and this Bréval method, this Bréval Treatise. I really believe that students don't need to go blindly into the Baroque era and figure it out as they go. There are all these exercises available. And again, it's not like you're going to go through all of them. I definitely realize that, but they're there. I don't know why we don't utilize them. I mean, students rarely are going to play anything perfectly or anything with the let's say correct interpretation. It's just not going to happen. So why not let students play? I just have a different take on things, quite possibly because I felt like I was going blindly and I just couldn't figure out how to make things work very well, and it was very frustrating. Now to conclude, let it be known that Bréval was a seriously busy composer and cellist. He wrote 91 works according to IMSLP, and this includes dozens of cello pieces like duets and sonatas and all sorts of things. He wrote string quartets, trios, symphonies. There's even a vocal work in there with orchestra, and of course his cello method, which is really monumental in a way. I mean, 170 duets in all 24 keys, and at least 3 to 4 numbers per key. And then after that, all of those other exercises, including sonatas and duos. The exercises for the arpeggios, there are even harmonic exercises and then thumb position exercises and exercises both for double stops and double stops in thumb position. Lots and lots of just crazy things. If you go through them all, you will know your fingerboard. I mean, you'll know everything about it. Yes, it gets a little dry. I have to admit, it gets a little dry, and I'm not that excited about playing the entire thing. But I do think you can glean a lot of useful information, a lot of useful technique, specifically about this era in music. And why don't we do it? Hey, thanks a lot for listening. Thank you so much to my listeners. I hope you enjoy. If you have any comments, any observations, if you have any suggestions, just write them in a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. This kind of thing is not for everybody, and if you don't like it, that's fine too. Hey, remember to play more forgotten cello music. See you in the next episode.